Hello, my favorite listener. You found yourself back into the dark of the woods, and this is episode 3 of The Bargain of the Field. This is a Rust Belt Studio production, and just like any of the others, it takes time to make. Your support is always appreciated via the Acast supporter feature, just listening to this, telling a friend, getting us out into the great big world. Thank you for everything you do, and go ahead and settle in. The show's about to start. The air carried the first real bite of cold. The kind that made breath drift white and set cheeks pink, but wasn't sharp enough yet to drive anyone inside. October 26th was made for sweaters and boots, and for cider cups keeping hands warm. Iron Bay's ball field had been transformed. Rows of cornstalks lashed together, bales stacked high, pumpkins lined up along the fence posts like lanterns waiting to be lit. At the edge of it all, the maze sprawled, twisting corridors of bundled stalks, wide enough for 3 people to walk shoulder to shoulder, narrow enough that laughter bounced and echoed until you couldn't tell who was around the next bend. Anja darted in with her friends, a group of 20-somethings who laughed louder than the children running at their heels. They shoved each other playfully, pretended to be lost after only 2 turns, doubled back just enough to make the younger kids squeal. One boy brought a flashlight even though the sun hadn't yet set, flicking it under his chin to make ghost faces. "Grow up," Anja teased, but her grin gave her away. The smell of cider drifted from a stand near the entrance. Someone was selling cake donuts, cider's perfect companion. A fiddle played near the bleachers, the tune simple, fast, meant to keep feet moving. Lanterns would be lit once darkness came, but for now the maze belonged to daylight and laughter. Anja stopped at a junction, brushing paint flecks from her coat. She had come straight from the farm stand, where her painted gourds already drew attention. Her friends teased her about it, asking when she'd finally give up farm life for an art studio in Marquette. "This is my studio," she said, hands on her hips, daring them to argue. "Yeah, but a studio with chickens?" one of them shot back. "And goats," another added, making horns with his fingers. Anja shoved him into the cornstalks, his laughter trailing as they ran deeper in. They hit another dead end, groaned loud enough for the whole maze to hear, then turned back. A kid no taller than their waist pointed the right way, grinning with pumpkin-seeded teeth. They followed him a few turns before outpacing him again, shouting like children, chasing each other into the tangle of rows. The laughter spilled, breathless and easy, the sound of people young enough to play at being children, but old enough to know they were only borrowing the moment. Eero stood outside the maze watching. He leaned on the fence post, hat brim low, a paper cup of cider cooling in his hand. Neighbors greeted him as they passed, small nods, hands lifted in casual recognition. He nodded back, polite, never more. From where he stood, he could see the bed of his truck parked at the edge of the field. Pumpkins filled it to the rim, stacked in careful rows, their skins glowing in the slanting light. He counted them without meaning to. He counted again when wind rattled the stalks and Anja's laughter echoed above the noise. A neighbor clapped his shoulder. "Fine day for it, Eero." "Fine," he said. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Children darted from the maze entrance, waving stalks like swords. Their parents followed slower, cups of cider in hand. The whole town seemed gathered there, faces flushed, voices lifted, the kind of evening made for photographs. Eero sipped his cider and let the sweetness sit heavy on his tongue. He could hear Anja again, shouting triumph as her group found another dead end. She sounded happy, unburdened. It should have eased him. Instead, his eyes drifted back to the truck, to the pumpkins sitting too still, too bright. The sun slid lower, and shadows stretched across the field. The maze began to fill with lit-up lanterns, glowing and catching the corn leaves. The laughter seemed to carry sharper in the dark. Anja and her friends spilled out at last, flushed with triumph, arms linked together. She caught sight of Eero and jogged over, cheeks red, hair loose from its braid. "You missed it," she said, breathless. "I heard it." She rolled her eyes the way only someone who loved you could. "Don't be such a farmer." Then she hugged him quick, already turning back to the others, their voices pulling her away. Eero stood where he was, cider cold in his hand, hat brim low. The pumpkins in the truck glowed orange against the dark. He counted them once more just to be sure. Finally, he walked over and he unloaded them, getting some help from some of the townfolk nearby. He called out for Anja, but she decided that she was going to ride home with friends, so he hopped up into the truck and drove back to the farm. When he got home, the house was still. No voices, no laughter. Even the dog was quiet. That night, before bed, Eero said a prayer before his niece came home, hoping to see through this harvest one more time. In the morning, he came down, and he started the morning chores. A car pulled up and picked up his niece and took her back to town so she could work on more decorations. He finished the chores like he always did, slowly, feeding cattle, scattering grain, hauling water. Then he headed back into the house. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee gone cold. On the table, he'd pulled out the old album, its black cover scuffed, its corners soft from years of handling. It had been made for photographs once, thick paper pages edged with glue strips meant to hold family memories. But the Callios hadn't filled it with faces. They had filled it with clippings. Eero slid the album closer and opened it. The paper whispered when it turned, brittle and yellowing, the paste marks bleeding through. The first pages were very old, very delicate. Headlines clipped from papers across Michigan and Wisconsin. Names written in pencil at the corner. Always women. He traced one with his fingertips, farm woman found near an ironwood. The date was smudged, but the year was clear. 1937. A Callio cousin. His father noted in the margin, harvest year. He turned another page. Marquette teacher missing, body discovered in field. This was the 1980s. No Callio blood, but she'd vanished in October, found at Halloween. The pumpkin pictured beside her in the clippings, proud, round, untouched by rot, stared back at him. He turned more pages back and forth. Hands had kept the clippings neat, his father's, his uncle's, notes written in ledgers. Some had no photos, only words. Sault Ste. Marie woman lost on hike. Tourist from Lansing disappears during color season. Body located Halloween night. Always the same detail, the pumpkin that held. Orange and whole when it should have sagged and blackened, a face carved bright and laughing, or menacing and scary, sitting in the field untouched by time. Eero rubbed his thumb along the brittle paper. His aunt had been the last Callio taken back in '62. She had lived here on the farm, worked these same rows, and on Halloween she'd gone missing. A clipping from the Iron Bay Gazette marked it plain, local woman found dead in pumpkin patch. No mention of the truth. No one wrote about the bargain, the vain thing that hunted each season for its perfect pumpkin. It didn't always choose a Callio, but it always chose. Eno had crossed the ocean with his seeds. 1886 was the year the first Callio paid. That much the album had made clear. No explanation, no rules, just a pattern that stretched like a shadow across the pages. Eero sat back, the weight of it pressing into his chest. His father used to say the spirit was vain. It looked for its pumpkin, perfect, beautiful, carved for all to see. When it found that pumpkin, it claimed a woman. That was the shape of the bargain. Whether made or only followed, no one alive could say. He shut the album hard, and the sound was sharp in the kitchen. Outside, the wind rattled the dry stalks stacked at the stand. A crow called from the cedar ridge. The house groaned faintly in the quiet, old wood settling into itself. Eero stayed at the table, hands folded on the worn cover of the album. He didn't look at the clock. He didn't need to. October was moving day by day toward its end. The 28th dawned bright and brittle, the kind of morning where the frost clung to the grass, but the sun promised to burn it away by noon. By the time Eero and Anja rolled into town with the truck, Main Street was already a barricade of sawhorses and bunting. The whole town had come out, kids in knit hats, parents with thermoses of coffee, old-timers bundled in blankets and folding chairs lining the sidewalks. The parade always began at the top of the hill, where the Lutheran church's steeple cut the sky, and wound its way down past the bank, the diner, the drugstore, finishing at the schoolyard where the judging stand had been set. The street smelled of exhaust and cinnamon, hay dust and fried dough. Floats lined up in a ragged order, each one pulled by a tractor or pickup, wheels rattling over the blacktop. The first belonged to the Boy Scouts, who had lashed pumpkins to the sides of a hay wagon and draped it with a sheet painting Iron Bay strong. The second came from the volunteer fire department, sirens whooping once, loud enough to make children clap their hands to their ears before the driver grinned and cut them off. Next came the high school marching band, their uniforms stiff with gold braid, notes wobbling as brass clashed with drumline. They played a fight song no one could quite recognize, but the crowd clapped in rhythm anyway. Anja stood with her friends at the curb, cheering for all of it. She waved at the band, half of them kids she'd gone to school with, and laughed when one of the drummers nearly dropped a stick. Her voice carried, light and easy, weaving with the rest of the crowds. Eero kept to the back, hat brim low, arms folded. He nodded when a neighbor caught his eye, but the smile never stayed long. His gaze drifted again and again to the floats, to the pumpkins stacked high, tied down, painted and carved. Their orange skins seemed too bright under the pale sun. The 4-H Club came next, their float a small barn mock-up with plywood animals painted by hand. A pig with crooked eyes made the kids giggle. A goat that looked suspiciously like a dog drew even bigger laughs. Pumpkins ring the base, each one labeled with a child's name and marker. Behind them rolled the women's auxiliary, their float dressed as a giant pie tin, the edges ruffled with tinfoil, steam painted on butcher paper rising from the top. They tossed wrapped candies into the crowd, and children scrambled across the pavement, their mittens snatching sweets before the wheels rolled on. And then the centerpiece, the Pumpkin Queen's float. A flatbed trailer had been transformed with corn stalks, bales, and a throne built from rough timber and spray-painted gold. Pumpkins gleamed at its base, polished until they shone. On the throne sat the queen herself, a senior from the high school, crowned in a tiara cheap enough to glitter in the light. Her gown was orange satin, her smile wide as she waved. Her court sat around her, dressed in every shade of autumn. They blew kisses to the crowd, handed out small gourds from baskets. The kids reached for them like treasures, and Anja cheered, clapping until her palms stung. She wasn't jealous. She had aged out of all that, and besides, the whole thing was tradition more than honor. Still, she hollered with the rest, voice bright among the others. Eero couldn't look at that float for long. The pumpkins at its base gleamed too perfect, their ridges sharp, their skins unmarked. He found his eyes straying back again and again, even when the marching band tried to drown them out with another song. The parade rolled on. The VFW carried flags, their members stepping stiff in uniforms that no longer quite fit right. The church youth group built Noah's Ark out of cardboard, their animals 2x2 cutouts wobbling with every bump. A logging truck rumbled through with cedar logs chained down, the smell sharp and resinous as it passed. Every float carried pumpkins. Painted, carved, or plain, they stood out against hay and paper and cloth, orange against the gray street. Each one seemed to Eero like an eye turned toward him. By the time the last tractor passed, the Lions Club tossing taffy to the kids, his jaw ached from clenching it. The crowd spilled into the street, following the floats to the schoolyard where speeches and judging would soon follow. Anja tugged at his arm. "Come on, Uncle. We'll miss the crowning." He shook his head. "I've seen enough." "You're no fun," she said, but her tone was soft, affectionate. She went with her friends, leaving him at the edge of the street. Eero stayed there, the voices washing past him, his eyes on the pavement littered with candy wrappers and straw. He could still see the Queen's float in his mind, the polished pumpkins at her feet. The parade was over, but the unease clung to him. Each day ticked closer to Halloween, and the town moved with joy, blind to the shadow riding beside them. Hello again. Thank you for listening to this episode of Into the Dark of the Woods, The Bargain of the Fields. This show was written and performed by Brian Foster. You can hear this show and other shows we produce, like Mikey and the Garden Arch or Engine of War, via Acast or any other place that you listen to your podcasts. Please consider joining our Patreon, where your support will go to keeping all of our stories rolling all of the time. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon, my favorite listener.